How to Become a Virgin by Quentin Crisp, Chapter 10. The first finger that beckoned me across the Atlantic was not American but Canadian. A woman's voice spoke to me over the telephone. "Will you come to Toronto?" she asked coolly. "When?" "Well, now, actually." "For how long?" "Just for the day." If until that moment I had only suspected that the world had gone mad, the notion now became a certainty. In fact, I was still employed by several art schools, and could not leave at once. I went a fortnight later, and stayed a day and a half. The journey was my first long-distance flight. It is impossible not to regard the cloudscape below you as the surface of the earth. You are not aware of any motion, and feel that you are standing in a disused lighthouse, surveying a snowbound planet, long since bereft of human habitation, making its last meaningless million-year dash towards the sun. Inside the plane, a cozier atmosphere prevails. The staff of British Airways has been schooled in more than mere airworthiness. The stewards address you by your last name, and if you seem reluctant to eat or uncertain what to choose, with twinkling eyes and seductive smiles they act out the various delicacies on their trolleys. Because I was such a novice, I could not help contrasting their treatment of me with that inflicted on me by the slaves of British Rail. In other respects, I found air travel less exciting than the movies had led me to expect. No one became hysterical, no one near me was handcuffed to anyone else, and I couldn't glance nervously at the ice forming on the wings, because I couldn't see the wings. You eat, you sleep, and you go to the movies. You're hardly any better off than on Earth. A tailor would say that the east coast of the New World had been poorly finished off. Coming into Canada, it is hard to say at what exact moment you leave the ocean and are flying over land. At first there are below you innumerable capes, inlets, islands, and tiny lakes. Toronto is very beautiful. Its skyscrapers are honey-colored, which, as they are mostly banks, is appropriate. They seem almost to rise out of the lake and are lit horizontally by a light emanating from the water. In the middle of the city is a secular minaret, which I was told was the highest freestanding structure in the world. I did not ascend it. The lifts were loaded with tourists because the day I was there was Columbus Day. This I thought was an apt coincidence, because my sense of wonder at the New World compels me to go on about it as though no one had ever been there except me and Chris. Many of the buildings in Toronto are made of Identity Parade glass. I hope that from the inside of these edifices you can see out. From without, all I saw was a reflection of myself, standing at a window with the words Toronto Hotel written backwards above my head. On my first evening, I had difficulty in forcing myself to stand near the window because of its immense distance from the street below. The main purpose of my visit to Canada was to be seen and heard talking about the naked civil servant, which had recently been shown there. It had been solicitously decided that I could not travel 3,000 miles and be interviewed on the same day. In fact, I could have done so without any feeling whatsoever of exhaustion. There is no such thing as jet lag, especially if you are journeying from east to west. All the plane has to do is go up into the air, and, like Nijinsky, pause there a little. Canada will come by presently. Apparently, the man sent to meet me when I arrived in the New World was called Mr. Dvorak. In a purring limousine, he escorted me to the hotel, from which he promised to collect me the following evening. Before I had unpacked, I received a telephone call from the Toronto office of my paperback publisher. It was the caller's intention to whisk me the following morning in and out of various radio stations. My arrival 24 hours early had not been in vain. A year before, I would have been amazed at this proposal. Now I remained calm. I had learned in the meantime the difference between hardback and paperback publishing. Hardback publishers are not seriously in the business of selling their wares. They are content with laying them at the reader's feet. Any more energetic practice might seem ungentlemanly. At parties in the last few years I have met men in the trade who could be bullied into agreeing with this statement, so long as their names were never mentioned in this connection. They admit that there are no junior employees in their offices whose function, day after day, is to read the papers in the hope of finding that one of the firm's authors is dead, has been sent to prison, or done anything else to merit a reprint. To laymen, it is obvious that televiewers love to see writers in alpaca suits sitting on swivel chairs and talking about their sex lives, provided that these divine beings do not make the mistake of rabbiting on about their dreary books. Inside the business, no one can bring himself to accept that writing is not a literary career, but a personality racket. Many English writers are relieved to know that their actual bodies will never be used as sales adjuncts. It might have been difficult, for instance, to persuade E.M. Forster to run around Bedford Square in a funny hat. As for me, I've got the hat. All I ask is, which way do I go? For this reason, I had been bewildered when I discovered that Cape had no intention of dipping its toe, much less plunging head first, into the tide of publicity that flowed first from Granada's and then from Thames's television programs about me. There were to be no more printings of my autobiography in its original format. Since that terrible time, Duckworth has been kind enough to bring out a different hardback version, solely in order to attract more recent reviews, while Fontana, which may be another floor, another room, or merely another desk in Collins, published a wonderful cheap, or at least cheaper, edition. They are, moreover, pleased to make use of the element of vulgarity in my nature. For this purpose, they have a press office in which at least one person is constantly at work. Day and night, like a lighthouse, her gaze ransacks the ocean of human activity in search of an island, a mere rock will do, upon which a bookstall can be set up. In England, on wherever I went to speak to the multitude, she was willing, nay eager, to pay my fare and feed me. I was delighted to find that, though she organized these book-signing sessions with great efficiency, ruled provincial booksellers firmly, and commanded area representatives to meet our trains as though we were ambassadors, she was never shrill. She remained forever silky. As with London, so with Toronto. In Canada, because of the whirlwind nature of my visit, I was taken to 4 small radio stations in one day. These brief interviews were much as I had expected, but I had not imagined that Canadian men would be such a self-indulgent shape. There is no national face above the 49th parallel, but there is a typical figure. In spite of all that ice hockey that we see on English television, I do not think much exercise is taken by the average Torontonian. Between those appointments, we managed to wedge in several large meals and a visit to a paper called the Body Politic. This periodical is the gay voice of Toronto. As its name implies, it is more militant than, say, Gay News, but it is determined rather than strident. The issue of the paper I was shown espoused the cause of a man who had been dismissed from his job on the explicit grounds that he was homosexual. He was a horse trainer. It is difficult to imagine what goes on in the minds of some heterosexuals. The body politic is run by very young people, several men and a girl. They occupy a warehouse situated beyond the business and shopping areas of the city. We went up to the editorial office in a lift, like the one which Miss Dietrich fell to the bottom of in Pittsburgh. The room where we talked was large and airy, possibly difficult to heat in winter, but the staff is dauntless. I was given a cup of tea and questioned about my private life. I apologized for my lack of aggression. I think it saddened them, but they remained unfailingly polite. After this interview, some of those with whom I had been speaking accompanied me through the streets in search of lunch. They noticed without surprise that a few passers-by stared at me, but expressed amazement that I paid no attention to any of the pretty boys that wandered past us. I can only express a counter-surprise. My life has, in recent times, become literally an open book. Everyone who is interested in me at all knows that, in earlier years, I spent a great deal of time trying to qualify as a pretty boy. Surely they must be able to guess that, because of this, I am horribly aware how self-regarding, feeble, and generally not worth the money this particular species can be. When I left Canada, I did not immediately return to England. I went to New York. Entering the United States, I proffered my passport for the very first time in my life. A gigantic airport official examined it thoroughly before giving it back to me. When I thanked him and turned to go, he bent down and, in a very quiet voice, said, "Is it nice to be vindicated at last?" My spies are everywhere. When, a year afterwards, I did the one-man show in New Haven, Washington, and New York, I went again to Toronto. During my later, longer visit, my impression of the city was different, though not necessarily any more accurate. Mr. Muggeridge, whose voice was made for expressing bland contempt, says that I live a showbiz life, and shall never see the places as they really are. He is absolutely right. The second time round, everything seemed less frighteningly grand. I do not wish to imply that, during one short year, the glory of Canada had faded. All that happened was that I inhabited a slightly cheaper part of town. I do not think I even so much as walked past the Toronto Hotel, where I had spent 2 nights of deep-piled opulence, nor did I catch even a glimpse of that strange edifice that claimed to be of unparalleled height. I stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, which, contrary to what its hyphenated name might lead guests to suppose, was quite unpretentious, and in no way intimidating, even to someone as pathologically terrified of hotel staff as I am. I appeared at the Workshop Theatre, to which I traveled by taxi, but only to show that I could. If compelled by fate to traverse the distance on foot, the journey took less than a quarter of an hour, so I saw little of the city. As always, when not in my hotel room or on stage, I made sorties to various television and radio stations. Canadians are very conscious of the power of publicity. In 14 days I was interviewed 21 times. In between these professional activities, I just managed to visit my 2 spies in Canada. One of these was the woman who, in England, 20 long dark years before, had ruled the display firm where I had painted the faces of 4,000 dolls. Now in a quieter mood, she runs a curiosity shop for cat worshippers. I am happy to say that the place harbors no actual animals, but it is full of feline fetishes, cards, calendars, knickknacks. The other spy is the woman to whom, when she lived in Crouch End, we tried to bring notoriety by writing television plays in her name. She has now abandoned her quest for fame and settled for mere happiness. One of her daughters took me to see a dance class. The hunger for culture is far less self-wounding in Canada than in Australia, but it is present nonetheless. When I asked this girl if she was a pupil at the school, she replied that she was not, that she was a member of a ballet company. This seemed to be an improvement until I learned that she received no wages. I was saddened by hearing this. To an outsider, Canada looks physically so open, so full of light, and spiritually so free from deviousness or pretense. But even there seems to be a certain amount of double thinking, and therefore, perhaps, though I personally saw none, of double dealing. The fact that young people donate their energies and their talents so eagerly is no argument for accepting them without payment. No art should be subsidized, either by governments or, worse, by its practitioners. Now that I habitually travel distances so much greater than formerly, I would have dared or could have afforded. I am often reunited with people whom I have not seen for huge stretches of time. The changes that the years have wrought in them are consequently more obvious. So far, these confrontations with the past have always given me pleasure. My friends usually seem to have grown calmer. This is a development that I applaud. But as a devotee of relativity, I must constantly remind myself that, if this is the alteration I see in them, they must find me more feverish. A suspicion recently turned into conviction by a letter received from a friend in France. It contained this warning: try not to start wanting things. It would appear that the asceticism for which I have had a lifelong reputation was prompted by circumstantial necessity rather than innate spirituality. I doubt that I shall ever want things, but now that I am free, there is no limit to my appetite for events and people. Chapter 11. For weeks there were rumors that, like other wrongdoers before me, I would be sent to Australia. I tried not to hear them. Thus I did not know that this mad scheme had become a certainty until I was sitting at a lunch table opposite a Mr. Cook, perhaps a descendant of that seafaring gentleman who discovered the place. In his native land he is called an entrepreneur. This I found strange. Even in England, 12,000 miles from that proverbially no-nonsense continent, the word sounds a trifle fancy, but impresario is not much better, and the American word promoter carries with it a faint suspicion of chicanery. But what's in a name? He had chosen a profession in pursuit of which he traveled all over the world in search of entertainment that he could transplant to the Antipodes. While he was in America on one of these foraging sorties, he spoke with the Mr. Taylor, who later brought Mr. Brenner in The King and I to England. Mr. Taylor had seen me at the Duke of York's theatre, and advised Mr. Cook to do the same. What chance had caused these two gentlemen to meet, I never asked. By this time I accepted that fate was my agent. All the same, when I saw that a visit to Australia was irrevocable, I was very frightened. I explained that I had never spoken to more than 700 people at any one time, and that even that number had proved too many. Mr. Cook said that I need have no fear, that I would be wired for sound. I pointed out that Australians despise the English nation in general and would find me particularly revolting. Mr. Cook said that a theatre audience was the same the whole world over, and that if I'd managed all right here, I would have no trouble there. Every objection that I raised was overruled, every doubt silenced. During this dialogue, the enigmatic Mr. Taylor arrived and remarked that my act would have to be made more elegant. He also suggested that its contents should be altered slightly to appeal to Australian tastes. I bowed my head, assuming that he was an authority on that distant world of which I knew nothing. It transpired later that he had never been near the place. In spite of all this reassurance, all this friendly advice, I still had secret misgivings. I was right. The Australian tour was a disaster. Even so, it might have been worse, had not my agent succeeded in bamboozling into coming with me the young woman who had assisted me at the Duke of York's theatre. She was of high degree, her father being a baronet or worse, but asked why she worked when she could so easily have stayed in bed all day polishing her coronet. She replied that she needed the money. Nevertheless, public relations was an odd career for her to have chosen. It is a ruthless profession whose practitioners are sometimes driven to manipulate their victims while pretending to protect them, and in which fulsome praise is forever trembling on the brink of downright untruth. My assistant was a moralist and consequently spent most of her working life in a state of collapse. She turned out to be the ideal traveling companion. Being so slight as to be hardly visible to the naked eye, she could easily be folded and stowed away in any make of car without the least inconvenience to other passengers. Moreover, she not only took up very little space, but also demanded almost no attention. As she did not like the real world, she spent most of her time in it asleep. Miraculously, being frail turned out not to be the same thing as being scatterbrained. At least, we never arrived at the wrong place on the wrong day. As we stepped out of that plane in Sydney, I reassured my companion that, it being only 7 in the morning, we would easily be able to slip into our hotel unnoticed. Never was prophecy more spectacularly unfulfilled. The moment that we wheeled our luggage out of the airport, we found ourselves in a lightning storm of flash bulbs, a thunderclap of interrogation. Even when the car that was taking us to our hotel drew away from the curb, reporters ran beside it, their lips still moving. Once we were in our rooms, the hubbub that I had assumed would cease became worse. We discovered that a small documentary movie was to be made of our arrival. There were people photographing the people photographing us. It was as though we had come to save the whole continent. Just as the entire world adores France, but has recently come to dislike the French, so, though Australians despise the British, they love England, and for a while, at any rate to the press, I became the embodiment of the traditions of my native land, although in fact I have always rebelled against them. What is at the heart of this inordinate passion for Britain? I think I may by accident have hit upon the answer. Many long dark years ago, I took a friend to see a movie called King Kong, the first time round. During a dramatic episode in which a certain Miss Ray lay gibbering across Mr. Kong's wrist, my companion, in a voice shrill with irritation, cried out, "I can't think what he sees in her." I suggested that it might be her littleness that was her attraction. Perhaps it is a similar discrepancy of sizes that binds Australia to England. In the 10 weeks that I worked for Mr. Cook, I went to Orange, to Newcastle, and, except for Darwin, to every capital city in his kingdom. Some of those towns I visited more than once, going there first to say that I was going there, and later to do the show. In all that time I was embroiled in only one hostile interview. This was with a man and woman who were quite unable to take their minds off what I looked like. As I was leaving, the man essayed a mild send-up by remarking that, If I wished to add a few small touches to my appearance, the makeup department would be only too willing to help. In the theater, I was compelled to read no more than a dozen questions calculated to embarrass me. The word poof was used only once, at least in my hearing. Most of the questions asked by the professional interviewers were self-deprecating. One reporter kept saying, "We're so far from everywhere, aren't we?" I pointed out that Sydney is no further from New York than New York from Sydney. "Well, no," the lady grudgingly admitted. "Nobody," I remarked, "is sitting by his window in America, sighing because he is so far from Australia." "Exactly, that's just what I mean." "Then," I suggested, "remoteness is in the heart." The young woman wrote these observations down, but she didn't look as though she believed me. Another often repeated question was, "Australia is a cultural desert, don't you think?" This statement was wasted on me. If I ever used the word culture, it is to describe television programs so boring they cannot be classified as entertainment. Australians are a nation of Madam Butterflies. They are forever standing on the shore watching for that wisp of heaven knows what that will appear on the horizon one day. But why? They lack nothing. The streets beneath their feet are paved with opals. The air about them sparkles like diamonds. The atmosphere is so clear that the roofs of their houses are always as red as the day they were tiled, the walls as white as when they were first painted. Strangers kept saying that it was a pity that we had arrived in winter, but in fact every day that we were there was warmer than an English May. This appearance of eternal summer was reinforced by the look of the trees, most of which are evergreen. Those that are look not as though their foliage had sprung spontaneously from their boughs, but rather as if it had been flung onto their branches from a distance, wet. Those that are not evergreen display scarlet flowers the size of table mats. Partly because of this halcyon weather, all Australian cities are holiday resorts. On their free days, the natives take off their socks and shoes and walk down to the sea's edge. If you tried that in London, you would feel very ill by the time you got there. Furthermore, in Australia, there seems to be no poverty. The trains are empty, but the aeroplanes are full, chiefly of men carrying their board meeting suits in plastic bags. Occasionally in Sydney, I saw sunburnt old men who looked as though they were left over cold from a gold rush, but there were no beggars, no street bands, no little old ladies slumped in doorways under several overcoats. Except for the black swans of Perth, there were very few even of nature's born cadgers, the birds. I constantly tried to reassure my interviewers. I seldom succeeded. It is possible that Australians are self-deprecatory out of politeness. They may well feel that it would be graceless to flaunt their ocean-to-ocean prosperity before the hollow eyes of travelers from a dying star. My tour of the Antipodes failed not because of any hostility from my audiences. No empty beer cans were thrown on stage. I foundered, and this we had not, in our arrogance, thought possible, on their indifference. When I strolled about the streets or went into the shops of King's Cross, the district of Sydney in which our hotel is situated, my presence seemed to be taken completely for granted. In Melbourne, the reaction was the same. I stood in the entrance to a cinema waiting for a taxi, while near at hand, two young men discussed whether they had or had not seen me on television a few days earlier. When they decided that they had, one of them approached and shook my hand. After the usual exchange of pleasantries, he said, "So you're homosexual. Big deal." I did not think these words were meant to discomfit me, but rather that they were a comment on the folly of the sex-obsessed world. The same cool attitude was expressed even in Brisbane, which, in other parts of Australia, is the butt of jokes similar to those that in England are heaped upon Wigan. One evening I was standing in my hotel room looking down onto one of those dolls' houses churches that nestle among the skyscrapers of Brisbane when the telephone bell rang. My caller explained that he was attending a school in which his class had been told to write an essay about the television documentary program showing my arrival in Australia. This piece of information by itself astounded me. In England, no teacher would set his pupils such an inflammatory subject unless he were more interested in publicity than in a steady job. More amazing, however, than the shadowy figure of this broad-minded master was the very real student. Apparently, without any prompting from his elders, he had nagged his sister into driving him into town so that he might embellish his thesis with details gathered first-hand by me. He was 14 at the oldest, yet Mr. Darwin setting out in the Beagle cannot have had to summon up more scientific detachment than this child. I realized instantly that I must not figure in a fifth-form essay beginning, "When I talked with Mr. Crisp in his hotel bedroom." I therefore asked my visitor to accompany me to my dressing-room at the theatre, where I was to perform in an hour's time. Backstage, I answered all the young man's questions, without, I hope, saying anything that, if quoted, would alarm his father or his headmaster. Even so, our conversation was by no means bland. "My friends say that you're a slob," the boy remarked, with no apparent hostility. He had noticed that my shirt was held together with a safety pin. Had he known it, this was a good night. Sometimes I seemed to be dressed in chain mail. This young man seemed critical, but in no way hysterical or angry. He appeared interested in me, but not unduly curious about my sex life. How different was this urbane attitude from the mixture of rudeness and cowardice that marks the behavior of English schoolboys, who, on railway platforms, call my name, but, when I turn towards them, scamper into the nearest waiting-room. The sophistication of Australia was so complete that it did more than set the people free to come and see me. They felt sufficiently liberated to stay away. The blame for the disasters in one's life must always fall upon oneself. I should have protested longer or louder that I could not fill a large theatre in Australia or anywhere else. I should have forced Mr. Cook to believe me. There is a sense in which I betrayed him, but in spite of the staggering financial loss that he must have sustained on my account, he remained unfailingly courteous. I hope that, for my part, I made it clear how grateful I was for the opportunity he gave me to visit this strange continent, sparse but wealthy, barbaric but modern, self-effacing but friendly. I felt my shame less keenly than I might have done, because, to me, all performances elsewhere in the world are but dress rehearsals for America.